late arrivers, so we're just going to give things a couple more moments for everyone to get into place before we begin today's presentation. I would like to thank everyone for joining us for today's installment of the RBC webinar series. My name is Tim Spagnola. Many of you might know me from the recruitingblogs.com. We have an informative presentation for all of you today, sponsored by our good friends at SkillSurvey. Today's topic is how automated reference checking is changing the hiring game. And before I share information on today's speaker, a few quick reminders. At the end of today's presentation, we will have a few moments for a Q&A session. Questions can be asked by the platform itself. On your right-hand side, you'll see an area where you could ask questions. And we'll also be tracking and following things on Twitter. You could feel free to direct message questions to @recruitingblogs or use the hashtag recruitingblogs, and we'll pick those up. Another quick reminder, all registered attendees today will receiving a follow-up email with a link to today's presentation, a recorded copy of today's presentation. So with that said, I'm really delighted to introduce today's presenter. We have with us today Jack Kramer. Jack is the Vice President of Field Operations for SkillSurvey, Inc. Jack has over 23 years of experience driving sales and go-to-market strategies for technology companies. Prior to joining SkillSurvey, Jack held the position of Vice President and General Manager of SumTotal Systems International Operations. In that post, Jack was responsible for driving strategy, sales, and support for SumTotal partners, specializing in business process outsourcing, systems integration, OEM, and content development. Jack has earned kudos as both with startups as well as publicly traded companies for turning around poorly performing teams and revamping processes and supercharging sales. So we're really delighted to have him with us. And with that said, Jack, I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, good morning for those on the West Coast. I wanted to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to spend some time with us and take a look at some tools that have been around for a long, long time that are now being kind of re-energized, if you will, and put into spots and slots within your hiring process and can really change the landscape, the trajectory of an organization, both from a personal perspective with you and your careers, as well as an organization and how they perform it in the marketplace against their peers. When we talk about reference checking, I thought that one thing we should do is take a look at the history of a reference check, because I think everybody on the webinar would agree they know what a reference check is. And when you look at the historic aspects of it, it really was one of the most important steps in the hiring process. And a lot of times, a candidate would run through the process, and you guys may even do it today. You get down to the finals, and contingent on your references, your background check, etc., here's your offer. And you would get on the phone. One hiring manager would talk to a former manager or supervisor, and to them about the individual, just kind of validating who they are, what they said they would. A lot of times, try to pick up little nuances or subtleties about how they work every day. What are they like to work with every day? Do they have any challenges? Because nobody's perfect. Do they have any gaps in their background or their make that if I could put some training, some mentoring, some et cetera, I can close that gap? But what you're really trying to do is get some actionable information. If you have two candidates, is it going to help screen one out or have one rise to the top? If this information you're going to glean from a former manager or supervisor, is it going to help this person succeed? And gosh, I mean, wouldn't it be terrific if you could actually predict future behavior? Because a lot of times you ask for a reference and help at least 3 former managers. But nowadays, if you look at it, there's things that you're going to look to that managers are saying, but peers and subordinates will also tell another story. So you want to basically look at what you can get from a phone reference check today, whether you do it yourself, whether you use a partner to do it, or you outsource it, or something like that. And a lot of times it's that dates of employment. Right now, The real thing that you can get virtually is employment verification. Maybe whether or not they're rehirable or not, but things like interpersonal skills, teamwork, work ethic, integrity, those are the things that you can't get on a reference phone call anymore. Companies just don't want to do it for legal reasons. And then when you're thinking about working closely or calling a person who managed this potential candidate, a lot of times the peers and subordinates are the ones who will tell the story about how they are to work on a team, or what they're doing when the boss is not in the office, or their personality, things like that. So you want to really get information from those references that can help you make a decision, and that's where we're having a gap in the hiring supply chain. If you look at the long-term effectiveness of it, it really was a really great step in the process. And for those of you who have had a good reference phone call where you actually get good information that can either validate or not, you know that at one point it was really important, and now you're seeing it come back. We're seeing it come back to life. We're seeing it come back to the point where it is something that can make an impact on the hiring decisions. But the two questions we like to ask is, can we make this relevant again? Because so many people have stopped doing it and doing it effectively, and should it be, right? So the first thing to do is just to look at, what happened. And really, when you start looking at it, it was the lawyers got involved. And what happened in the late 90s into the early 2000s, there were a number of seven-figure judgments that came out of some court cases where judges and juries said, you were either somehow biased or adversely impacted by the questions and corresponding answers that a reference provided. Therefore, here's a seven-figure judgment. And obviously, the lawyers and legal departments cracked down and basically said, no more reference checking. So hiring managers, departmental leads, managers, et cetera, could no longer take a reference phone call. It all had to be funneled towards HR. So not that you didn't have more work to do, but now you've got inbound reference checking to do. So then some companies looked and said, okay, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to just either outsource it. Again, becomes a check the box, because if you outsource reference checking, somebody in the building thinks it's important. Maybe it's compliance, maybe it's some other reason that you must reference check. Maybe it's a big customer who demands it. But a lot of times, that little subtlety that you had when you talk to somebody at a former company, a lot of people will tell me, well, I listen to their voice and the way they answer questions. You don't get that when you check the box. You don't get that when you're farmed out to an outsourced call center that's just making 500 phone calls a day to make references respond. The worst thing that could happen is that you stop doing it completely. So that, again, there's some pretty bad scenarios there, but if you do try it, it's a really difficult task to get accomplished. I had a former manager of mine who was going for a new job that is a terrific person, great manager, great performer. Took me almost 10 working days to go from the first time the hiring manager reached out to me, and that person in turn was pretty busy and traveling and email, phone call, tag, and et cetera, but it took almost 10 working days. And this is for somebody that I wanted to do a reference for, right? So basically hours and hours, weeks and weeks of time, and at the end of the day, when I finally talked to that individual, they asked me not a single question that would help either predict this guy's future behavior, would see if he was a good fit for their organization, and other than talking about, Big Ten football and his season tickets with the Wisconsin Badgers, there was nothing that could help impact this guy's day-to-day work. So then you look at the problem. So you got the history is that it was important. Then you look at the problem internally. This is why we don't do this anymore. And then finally you look at the candidates. And the problem that you have with the candidates is most candidates these days are really good at interviewing, phone and in person, because a lot of times, the unemployment, the long-term unemployed especially, or people who have been out of jobs a number of times in the last few years, get really good at interviewing. And they basically tell you essentially what you want to hear. They start pacing you. They're working with like the hire right guys and watching YouTube videos about how to interview and things like that. They're going to tell you that they don't sit on Facebook all day or sit texting all day, and most do the right thing every single time a situation is presented. So basically, you look at the other side of this is that if a candidate is out interviewing, even if they're an individual who doesn't interview a lot, well, you can go out and look on YouTube and Google what are the tough job questions that interviewers are going to ask me. Questions, answers, responses, all those kind of things are available for that, so that you can present yourself well as a candidate. So now you think about that, you've got the interview, you've got personality assessments, you've got all these other tools to assess the candidate. But remember, you're getting the candidate's perspective of how they think they'll fit in your organization, how they'll fit in your culture, how they'll fit in with regards to getting the job done on a daily basis. What you really need is a true 360 view of that individual. So if you kind of keep that in mind, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but that's essentially what you want. Because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do, you're trying to avoid a bad hire, right? And a bad hire has an impact. And the impact, it really does vary by organization, and within an organization, it varies by role, right? So if you look at, I always refer to the CFO sniff test, okay? That's basically, can you walk down the hallway to somebody in finance and say, here, I need to spend some money because I'm going to get this return? There are hard dollar costs associated with a bad hire, and that could be wasted money on base salary, benefits, maybe the onboarding and training, mentoring and time like that. There's also exit costs, separation costs, things like that. The softer, non-finance agreeable things are things like internal team turmoil. So if you're a nurse and you're working a shift and you've got 4 other people working with you supporting a floor or a department or the ICU or something, and you've got one person not pulling their weight or not showing up for work on time or calling in sick and not performing, that's going to cause, obviously, internal turmoil. Customer satisfaction is easy. I mean, if you've got somebody on the phone with an irate customer and they don't care or they don't treat them properly, those kind of things will impact your long-term health and revenue and reimbursements, things like that. And finally, compliance. We all live through the Enrons of the world and the meltdown in the financial markets. Obviously, people in those kind of things end up, in jail and fines and things like that. So the laws of the land are important as well. If you look at sales, almost everybody on the webinar today, except for a few healthcare organizations, has a sales role. So every day that somebody's not selling, it's a cost of lost revenue. That, as well as time, an asset that you never get back. You can't go back there and get something that goes away in the sales world. And I mentioned the healthcare systems that are on today. When you think about HCAHPS and the reimbursements coming from the government in the U.S., I mean, this is a dollar-for-dollar thing that when patient satisfaction goes down, reimbursements will in turn go down, and therefore everybody in the organization suffers. So with that in mind, I wanted to throw a number at you so you can take a look at what this number means. So $23,160,000, pretty big number. So when you start looking at this thing, at the statistics that we had about 3,500 sales candidates run through SkillSurvey last year with our customers. Evaluate those candidates with scientific and predictive questions and responses from references about a particular candidate, and found about 11% of those people came back where they were a little sketchy. Should go back, look at them, potentially avoid them. References were telling those people a story. If you look at that data and you take the average cost per sales individual in North America at $60,000, you times 386 candidates by that number, and you get $23 million. So if you think about your organization and you think about avoiding one person who could cause the impact of a bad hire, you think about what it costs, dollars and cents per diems, all those kind of things. Obviously, these are big numbers, and even within a small organization or a big organization, you're going to have that impact. So let's go back to the perspective again. So when we talk about the candidate, everything that you do with the candidate, from phone interviews to if you do use personality or behaviors assessment, everything is from the candidate's perspective. Okay? They're going to tell you what you want to hear, especially the people who have been interviewing a lot. They're a team player, they are terrific, and they work weekends, nights, everything. They just need a job. When you then go to those references, a lot of times those references are coached, to what they want to say, and they are going to kind of tell you exactly what the candidate wants them to say. They work hard, she's terrific, etc. And now my favorite is, I'd hire them again, but I just don't have headcount or budget right now. That's my favorite. So if you think about that, what we're trying to do is we're saying, let's shift the lens. Let's take the whole thing, kind of turn it on its side, and look at it from a different perspective. We're still going to go back to references. We still think references can be a viable alternative, and an important step in the hiring process. But what we're doing is we're going to put the reference check right into the tail end of the hiring process, the tail end of the screening process. And what we're going to find from these references are the things that typically impact somebody's long-term success at your organization. A lot of times people don't get fired, because they can't perform a task. It's a lot of times it's things like teamwork and dependability and work ethic, and the things in those green boxes where they're the reasons that people get let go, not because they can't put an IV in somebody's arm or they can't use an Excel spreadsheet. So again, if you think about the people side of this thing, we're trying to get a different perspective. We're trying to look at the candidate, not from their perspective, but from the perspective of those people who have seen these behaviors in the past, okay? So keep that in mind, changing the lens. If you look at the comparison of kind of the typical phone check, if you are doing that yourself, about 70 to 85%, depending on the audience and markets, do reference checks. A lot of them don't do it on every employee. They don't do it on entry level, or maybe they outsource that to a third party and they get the check the box thing. But typically it takes anywhere from 5 to 10 working days. And I mentioned my story about somebody that I really wanted to do a reference for. You're going to see it happen a lot faster with some automated tools. So very similar if you think back to when an ATS first came onto the market, and you used to have the piece of paper and somehow get it from a candidate into the system, into other people's hands and copies and things like that. Now online, people are filling things out. You're not even seeing it until it's screened out to the point where they're a viable potential candidate. Same kind of concept, right? This is just a little bit behind that curve. Whereas in typical phone references, you're not really going to get much out of that. Even if you are talking to a former manager, a lot of times from a legal perspective, you're not going to see those that $23 million worth of people. So 5 to 10% of the time, you're going to see candidates wash out, where they're going to references are coming back and going to say, please, double check and do some more due diligence. So when you start thinking about the impact on you and your organization, obviously there's a couple things to look at. You can improve a number of components of the operation, from quality of hire to working more closely with hiring teams and hiring managers, and all the way down to compliance and consistency, where you're going to drive certain processes where everybody gets treated the same way. It's a workflow system. But at the end of the day, one of the things that we like to talk about is elevating the role of recruitment in the organization. We want to have you not only have a seat at the table, but a respected seat where the first thing a hiring manager will do is look to you in HR, talent acquisition, and recruiting and say, hey, what can we do, or what are you doing, or let's work together. So if you kind of keep that in mind, some of these things all done together, and I'll walk you through some scenarios how you can really impact your organization. So if you think about this this green bar, about 80–85% of references that go through systems like these basically will come back as validated candidates, where they are what you thought they were. The screening was good, the fit is good, and those people who have seen this behavior in the past are saying, you know what, this is a really good person. This next box, 10 to 15%, this is somebody who comes back with a couple of gaps. This is, if we could all look at ourselves and say, hey, we're not perfect, but there's some things I could work on. This is great for onboarding, mentoring, putting together some kind of curriculum to get people from, filling out your W-2 forms and things like that to basically getting into the building, getting ramped. Wouldn't it be great to know those things prior to them showing up for day one of work? These are the kind of people that, again, not a showstopper, but boy, it's nice to know some of those gaps ahead of time. And finally, this 5 to 10%, this great development need. These are the people we all know. You probably have seen them in the last working week. These are the people that we all look at and say, who hired this person and why are they still here? They stick out like a sore thumb. They drag everybody down. These are the people that we want to avoid. And the best way to find that is by talking to former managers and supervisors and people who were involved with this person before. So that's the first thing. The second thing that you want to start looking at is think about the hiring manager. Think about your relationship with a hiring manager, and how think about the most frustrating aspect of that. And it's so many times you put good candidates in front of people and they just can't get through the process. They lack that consistency that recruiters and HR people have every day, because you're talking on the phone to people, you're screening people, you're doing all those kind of things. typically good managers don't interview that often because they don't have much turnover, and they in turn again talk about Big Ten football and things like that. So, you know, this is where by putting some tools in place and putting some processes in place, you can in turn work with those hiring managers more closely, make them more effective at their jobs, which is not their day job, it's their part-time job because they typically don't have turnover. A couple of examples here I have for you is, you know, moving the hiring process, the reference checking up in the hiring process prior to final interviews would allow you to have a big impact. So for those healthcare customers on today, one of the things that you can do is you can interview for HCAHPS scores. So a couple of key points for a nurse, you know, do they listen carefully to patients? You know, do they effectively instruct patients and their families on home procedures? You know, these are kind of questions that former managers and coworkers are saying, hey, listen, this person wasn't very good at it. And as you go through the interview process, you can actually have these questions asked to the candidate by the manager, actually have that manager score these reports so they can actually see how they did. So again, driving the interview, showing people where the gaps may be ahead of time, helping that hiring manager help themselves, you in turn become a better partner with them and in turn make the whole process better. So when we talk about efficiency, it's another component of the value chain here. And really, if you think about the process, you've got really a ton of candidates out there. You screen them out. You get it down to 3 candidates, and typically you'll bring them into your building. You know, you might drive them in, fly them in, train them in, whatever you're going to do. But you're going to bring them in. You have your round-robin interviews. And typically, a lot of times, one person washes out. Or you've got the top 2, and you're trying to decide between the top 2. What our customers are doing as a best practice is they're inserting the reference check process right here. And in turn, a lot of time, they're screening out one. That person that gets screened out is typically somebody that maybe is, you know, 1 out of 3, they're the 3rd player, and we're going to put them on hold until we go through the other 2. And then we're going to use the reference report to help guide the interview, maybe help the selection process. You know, one time we hired a programmer here recently who didn't interview very well, but he's a programmer, he's a technical person, he's an introvert, he doesn't really communicate well. But his references came back and actually said that. And then they said he was a terrific employee. He's been here now with us over 2 years, and he's phenomenal. But if we didn't have that feedback, we might have gone with the person who was a little bit more personable but less skilled at the job. So, again, a lot of great benefits here, time, money, aggravation, working more closely with those hiring managers. So the next aspect of it is the efficiency play, and this gets down to you personally. So if you're in charge or have done this or are chartered with trying to do reference checks or trying to do a little bit more due diligence on a candidate, Tim Keefe runs the talent acquisition team at CH2M Hill. Probably don't know the name, a lot of people don't know, but they're a large engineering and construction firm. They do things like the London Olympics. They built that, and they're down in Brazil working on the next one. Big Six Sigma guy, knows down to the minute what it takes to get a person from the job application into onboarding. So a 55 work week reduction in the use of a tool like this. So in your own lives, if you think about it, you may not have 2,200 candidates to deal with in a given time frame, but you know what? If you've got 10 and you can save 90% of your time doing that and still get really tremendous value that helps the hiring managers, helps you career-wise and all those things, this makes a lot of sense. And again, maybe it'll allow you to work on that Stephen Covey area, those important but not urgent quadrant, or maybe it'll just allow you to get home and get to that lacrosse game or that baseball game or see the kids a little more often. So again, this is, again, another added benefit to it. So you can see operationally there's a lot of things that can help you. And finally, one of the really neat things about this is if you think about references today, a lot of times that reference request I told you about where it took me almost 10 days came in via email. And somebody gave them my email ID and phone number, and it turned out it was on a piece of paper. And now the 2 people that were chartered with doing the reference checks for that particular job role had 6 names, and none of those 6 names ended up in a database. So one of the things you can do is basically, as the end of this process, you've got the references' names, their contact information, all their history, where they worked with the candidate previously. You have the ability then to ask them if they'd like to join your talent pool to potentially come to work for you. So keeping this electronically, keeping it all in a spot where you can then mine it and go after that data is tremendous. These are passive people. These are not people on job boards or LinkedIn or something. They're actually doing a former colleague or employee a favor in performing a reference check. So when you talk about all those kind of things, one of the other things you got to worry about is risk. And this whole thing, if you think about why this whole thing started and why reference checking stopped becoming an effective part of the hiring process, was because of risk and the exposure that companies had with those seven-figure judgments. So if you work your way from right to left, you want to make sure that you're compliant with all the laws of the land, that everybody's treated fairly and all that. And oh, by the way, you need to have the science to back it up. So when I talk about science, I talk about the validity of that aspect of the reference check, is that if we're going to ask a question about a person and their behavior, we want to make sure that that is actually going to predict either future behavior, or it's going to help you understand that this job role and this person are well matched or not, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is if people on the phone are just asking simple questions, you can put yourself in your organization in a difficult situation. One of those seven-figure judgments in Michigan came down to a very simple inner-city recruiting team that was asking people where they went to high school. So if you think about your own, where you went to high school, and you think about different high schools in the inner city, they were found to be biased against certain people because they were asking where they went to high school. Something as simple as that can put yourselves in a position where not only is it career-altering, but it costs that organization seven figures. The other thing is those questions, make sure that they have no adverse impact, no subgroup bias, things like that, and you have to have a team in place that manage those and make sure that the vendors take care of those issues for you so that you handle just the fine-tuning on the recruiting function. And lastly, legal teams love this because everybody is treated the same way. So from a compliance perspective, you don't have to worry about recruiter A or HR person B treating somebody differently than everybody else is being treated from a candidate perspective. And obviously that can really help out. So when you talk about finance and budgets and things like that, again, you go back to how can I impact the organization? How can I be impactful to my career and maybe hiring managers and really kind of have a more rewarding experience with the organization in general. And these are some of the ways you can really contribute to that. The quality of hire, the impact of reducing turnover, getting rid of those 5 to 10 to 15% of people who typically wash out and cause the organization a problem. So, all the while trying to figure out, better ways to run the business, better ways to support the hiring managers in the hiring process. So again, from a soapbox perspective, we're going to elevate recruitment's role in the organization and give you a respected seat and something that with the lifeblood of the organization in your hands should have as well. So people then ask the next question, how does something like this work? So very simply, I'll just walk you through a couple of samples of it so you can kind of get your head around how overall the process would work, and then some of the outputs so you can see some samples. And essentially, a recruiter, administrator, HR person puts a candidate into the system. Takes less than a minute to do that. That's step one. Step two, the candidate then gets an email, links to our system, and actually they put the references in. So follow directions, be responsive, those kind of things. Then the references get an email and a link back to a survey, and it's 20, 25 question survey. They go through, they answer it, and the report is aggregated up and getting ready. Across the organization, from entry-level C workers to all the way to C-level people, and as you can see down through the organization, for those on the phone with healthcare, you know that we have about 80 clinical surveys out there just specifically for healthcare. But what I did today, just to have you guys kind of see an example, because of the most of the folks on the phone do have sales people in the organization. For those of you who actually recruited salespeople, they're a very difficult person to get to the bottom of. They present themselves well. They do that every day. So we thought we'd kind of focus on that. So literally, first name, last name, email ID, position they're applying for, and then basically you come down and you select one of the surveys that are available in the library. As you can see, there are enough sales roles, including individual contributor, entry level, all the way to executives. We'll choose the major account position. That's the role that Patrick is applying for today. Hit send candidate email, So 5 fields and a mouse click, and you're basically done. So once that happens, then our system takes over. We start communicating with the candidate. In the meantime, in the background, I'm talking about sales. I mentioned healthcare. There's over 300 plus surveys of different roles within the organization. Here's a sample of some of the finance roles. For the bank teller, like a banking role, the bank teller is obviously a key position. It's gone from a transactional role 5 years ago to very much a customer service / selling role, and our bank teller position actually supports that. So again, these are available for you. When we look at the risky folks that have been coming through our customer base, 13.9% of those folks came through in finance. Obviously in IT, another a big library that shows a lot of different roles and different jobs within the organization. 15% of those people came back in low scores or challenging scores. Customer service, 12%. And finally, when you look at our healthcare library, you got a number of different roles. When we look specifically at nursing, at almost 13%, or 13% of those folks coming back with some low scores. So again, across the organization, as you're going to see, and we all know them, we all know those people. We probably saw them in the hallway in the last couple of days. We're going to be in a position to help you avoid those. So if we go back to Patrick for a minute, remember we put his name, his email ID, we selected that survey, and we hit send candidate email. And what happens now is then we start communicating with Patrick. And we basically tell Patrick that, Patrick, it's coming from your organization. Thanks for your interest in this major account role. Click on this link, and we're going to take you through the process. Once he does that, he's brought over to the site where he enters in his references, including the time they worked together, their relationship, all those kind of things. Prior to him finalizing this step in the process, he actually signs off on a waiver, basically releasing everybody involved, previous, current, and future companies and organizations from any liability. Once he does that, he hits the I accept these terms, send candidate email. We then communicate with those references. Right now, our customers are getting a little over 5 references per candidate. And we're going to send an email out to those candidates, those references. They're going to link to our site, and they're going to be presented with one of our surveys. So in the major account role, the person who managed Patrick in the past is going to see the survey. And the survey is very simple. 1, I've never seen the behavior. 7, I've seen it all the time. Here's a sample of how it looks. And when I say it's very easy to fill out, it's radio buttons. You pick the radio buttons there in the highlighted area, 1 through 7. There is a not observed button. So if you think about personality assessments, if you've taken one, it's trying to get the best of the worst answer. So we don't force you to do that. We want to know if you saw the behavior, great. If you didn't, then not observe it. So 2 things I want to point out there. If you've interviewed salespeople, it's very rare to talk to a salesperson who's missed their numbers. And second, the thing you'll find is that references will start telling you a story. They'll start telling you about this person. And when I highlight number 10 there about relationships, if you think about selling and relationships, that's going to be a key point. But what happens is people will start telling you a story. So keep those 2 points in mind. I'm going to show you a sample in a minute about how we can support learning more about that. But there's 2 more questions we ask of that reference. We say, listen, we know that Patrick is not perfect. Can you give us the top 3 things that he does well and 3 things that he could work on, some challenges he might have? So once somebody fills out those things, or verbatim comments, free-form text, we ask one more question, and this is the passive sourcing. We say, would you like to learn more about job openings at, and this is where you would insert your company, your organization's name. If they say no, just complete the survey, then they're done, and we know who they are, their name, their information goes on the report. But if they say yes, they become a passive candidate. And at this point, you can do 2 things. One is you drop them into a database that you can go mine. But the other thing you can do is you can bring them right here. You can link them right back to your career page. So one of the things that you can find in this database is you might find people who just have always wanted to work at eBay, but never had taken the time to go out and look at their career page. And here we are being presented with an opportunity that every reference that goes through the eBay process can actually drop into their passive database. Again, another nice benefit there. So finally, we get to the output, and I'll walk you through a couple samples of this so you can see what it looks like. But really, what we do is first you show the overall scoring here, and we call this a validated candidate. So this is that major account role where you can see the scoring is mostly high and very high, and there's a medium in there. So that might be that yellow bar I showed you earlier where somebody has a gap, but it's not a showstopper, but we want to, we know it before we go into the relationship and we're going to move forward. Number of clusters in a report. One is professionalism. So maybe that gap in professionalism in this particular instance was G, that stay up to company product and features. Maybe that was where somebody gave that person a little bit of a lower score. So if I'm managing this person, when maybe we have a new policy as an organization, I'm going to double check with them, maybe triple check that they understand it and can communicate it back to me and all that. But at least I know it beforehand and I don't get surprised or frustrated later. So that's, again, another benefit of it. But unfortunately for Patrick and fortunately our customers, that 10 to 15% of those reports come back looking like this. So you can see the scores are in the low, medium, low area. There's one high, but everything else is distributed across the board. Now you got to remember, this is a reference check, right? So this is the references provided by the candidate, the best they have to this organization. This is a real report, a real sample of one of my customers. This is not a backdoor LinkedIn. I knew somebody who knew somebody's reference. This is the best they've got. So anything that's not high and very high is a red flag. So when we go down and we look at some of the clusters, I'll point out that meet or exceed that sales goal. Obviously, that's not being done, and Patrick is not coming through here. When we look at the other clusters, I talk about relationships, and this is a sample of where building relationships internal and external to the organization. The person is clearly not doing well on either one of those areas, and when you start looking at that, trying to figure out how they are relationship-wise on a resume, a job app, personality assessment, maybe you get a little bit of that. Interviews, really hard. And here these references are, again, saying, I've seen this person do this in the past, and it's not good, okay? So that's sales. When we look at nursing and we look at patient satisfaction and HCAHPS and reimbursement, not only you as an HR person in healthcare can say, I understand HCAHPS and the impact of my organization, I'm actually recruiting for it. I'm actually looking for the proper DNA, because we know listening and instructing is not something that is easily taught. It's either you have it or you don't, and so many RN managers and CNOs will tell you that. So again, you can not only get that seat at the table, but that respected seat. And so we talk about some verbatim comments, and again, this is where somebody says really good things. Somebody took the time to write impressive analytic skills, knows how to drive a sales cycle, target-driven, he's a hunter, knows how to get to the person in charge, performance-driven, right? All the things you think you want in a salesperson. And then you say, hey, well, what can he work on? Well, Patrick, he tends to work alone. He's very demanding of himself and his teammates. Not real good at relationships. And oh, by the way, that circle, he's got a temper. He's quick to react, but then calm down. Gets a PO and then gets bored. So if this is a kind of role where you're looking for somebody that needs to build relationships, internal and external, maybe work on a team, be involved with the customer long-term, Patrick's probably not your guy. If you need a guy that just goes out there and hunts, gets new business, and doesn't have to interact with too many people, he's probably perfect. But again, the references are telling you a story. They're telling you very specifically by job role that this person isn't very good in a major account sales role, all right? So you start thinking about how that impact might be in your final decision-making process. If this was a final candidate, then you'd have to step back. If it was one of two, maybe you don't bring Patrick in. Maybe you make another phone call before you bring him in and you lead the interview through some of these issues, but at least you see it before it happens and before he gets to your building. From a passive perspective, I mentioned, we have the database back there. You capture it. I just went into one of my customers' database. I typed in sales. Just basically what pops up is a list of anybody with a sales, a VP of sales, sales manager, any of their expertise around sales and sales management and sales process and things like that. Again, these people all went through the process and were not maybe on Career Builder's job board or looking at a job somewhere or posting on LinkedIn that they're looking for work. These people are passive. And again, they drop into your database. You own them. You have them. You keep them. We don't share them with anybody else. And you have the ability to then go and source them. So if you think about one hard-to-fill job that you've had in the last 6 to 12 months, one agency fee you had to pay that every time you write that check just kills you, this might be an area where you find some people who might be worthwhile, because as you know, good people have a tendency to work with good people, and eagles flock to eagles and fly with eagles, etc. So good people and good people typically run together. So if you think about the organization, you think about your impact. Again, I keep going back to, so what, who cares what's in it for me, you being a webinar attendee. I think you can make a big impact on an organization by changing the lens, changing the landscape, changing some processes that everybody used to use on a daily basis and a candidate-by-candidate basis. But you can have a clear impact on the organization by avoiding one person, by reducing turnover, by working more effectively as a team. Those things are all really big in adding more muscle, more weight to your career. This is not an implementation or a tool that takes months and years and years to get in. It's not like I was with a customer the other day in Charlotte, and they rolled their eyes because of their ATS upgrade, and 2 weeks ago somebody else was upgrading PeopleSoft, and it just goes on and on and on. This is a system that can be up and running in 2 working hours and become a real easy win for HR and for you personally. And again, I go back to, you've heard me say it probably 10 times today, elevating recruitment's role in the organization, and that seat at the table really changes when you can make an impact and work collectively and shoulder to shoulder with a hiring manager versus being a task-oriented, fill a seat kind of model. So a lot of business benefits. When you talk about our client base, and I just have a sample of some of the customers, you might see them as a who's who of some of the world-class recruiting and talent acquisition, HR function companies. They might be your peers, you might be competitors. You might have been in their shops or getting some support from one of their sites. So great customers. We've been fortunate to partner with them to bring forth world-class solutions. And just to give you a sense of some of the volumes here, you can see in 2008, only a few thousand people per month. Now we're up to well over 30,000 people, 35,000 people, candidates going through the system. And if you think about 5 times 35, you can really see what the impact is. And essentially, this is my only commercial. Really, it's about the company, and it really ties in, it revolves around my customers in that, with 700 plus customers driving 36,000 candidates a month, it is a very viral system. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of a SkillSurvey request, you typically see it and go through it. It's a very easy process. So we're very excited about it. We invented it. Our former, the person who started the company, our former president, was an ex-Citigroup guy in HR for a time, and thought there would be a better way, and actually filed to get a patent on it. So we're very excited about the opportunities to transition this type of tool from a really neat, really neat, cool tool to a must-have, have-to-have tool like an ATS or an HRIS system. So with that, Tim, I turn it back over and see if there are any questions.
Hey, Jack, thank you so much. A lot of great information shared there. So for registered participants, this would be a great opportunity while we have a few minutes left to ask any questions that you might have. Again, you could use the panel itself or the platform itself right there, or you could ask via Twitter, and we'll be monitoring that as well. And as I mentioned that, Jack, a couple questions have already come in. The first is, I think you touched upon it a little bit, but does SkillSurvey integrate with Taleo and other applicant tracking systems?
We do. Yeah, that's a good question. We do. We integrate with Taleo and iSIMS. We're working right now with Connexa and a few others. And basically what they've done is they've gone ahead and they've integrated us into the workflow. So when a customer, or excuse me, a candidate goes through a certain process and gets to a spot where either manually or automatically kicks off the reference check process, then we go ahead and go out, we grab the data out of their system, we communicate with the candidate and references, and then let the recruiting team know that the process is done and complete, and they can look at the reports.
Excellent. Thank you for that one. And another question that just came via Twitter is, why do you have so many surveys? Are you really able to capture that level of detailed information?
Yeah, that's a great question. And essentially, the reason there are so many surveys is, as you guys know, every job role is a little different. And you know, I could take an example of somebody in IT. So you would think an IT person is all the same. They're basically, you know, they do technical stuff. Well, if you have somebody you're trying to hire somebody for your help desk, that person needs to go office to office, cube to cube, you know, desktop, laptop to laptop, helping somebody with their BlackBerry or their iPhone. They have to be personable. They have to understand how people can get frustrated with technology. They have to have certain skill set in dealing with people and technology. Compare that person to maybe a programmer who walks in, may or may not say hello to anybody all day long, sits in a cube, iPhone in their ear, listening to music, typing away, cutting code, you know, doing those kind of things. Even though they're technical positions, they're both in IT. They are very different, have very different behaviors, very different competencies that you want to understand, and you want to ask references how they matched up against those very specific competencies. The surveys, just so you know, are developed by our PhD team, our IO psychologists, and basically what they do is they go out and look at that help desk role, and they develop the questions to help project what that candidate is going to look like against an A-plus player in that help desk role, or in that major account sales role, or in that bank teller role, or in that RN role. So they're being benchmarked against A-plus players, and we're going back to ask those references about how these people perform when it comes to their behaviors.
Great, great, excellent. Just looking at, again, if there's any other questions, we do have a few minutes left. Feel free to ask them now that we have Jack's attention. Jack, along the lines with you mentioning the integration with ATS, I'm assuming the same is with Workday and PeopleSoft, other HRIS systems as well?
Yeah, you know, we don't do much with regards to the HRIS systems. You know, because the system, when a report is ready to be viewed, and you click on the link to open the report, it actually is created as a PDF. So what our customers do is they'll take the PDF and they'll, you know, right mouse click and save it to, and they'll save it to either the ATS, or they'll save it to the to PeopleSoft or some other HRIS system. But it's essentially just they essentially just you know, move it that way. It's also helpful because you can put it as part of the interview packet, and you could email to a hiring manager, to maybe a training a person who's developing the onboarding curriculum, whatever it might be.
Great. And another question that just came to us from Twitter, this is a direct message. What are your recommendations, Jack, for a company that currently has no reference checking process? You know, what is maybe the easiest way to get this type of process started?
Well, you know, that's a great question, because there's two things that we look at with reference checking. One is, and a lot of times smaller organizations don't do reference checking. Maybe, you know, anywhere, you know, 300, 400, 500 people, 20 people companies, or really big companies. And I think the thing is, there's two things with a reference check. One is you don't want it to spend 5 or 10 days to try to get some information that's going to be helpful. Nobody wants to make the hiring process more complex. But what you do want to do is you want to impact the hiring process to get the right person in the right spot at the right company. And because the process is so labor, you know, it's not labor intensive. It takes literally a couple of minutes to get the process started and completed. It really adds nothing more to the length or the complexity of the operation. But I think the one thing to do is, and I had somebody from one of my health systems in Texas tell me a story a couple of weeks ago where part of their process is to do a reference check, and the hiring manager had worked with somebody in the past at another company and wanted to hire them. So they put them through the reference check thing. The report came back, and it really said, don't hire them. And the hiring manager, because they worked previously together, a little bit of the halo effect, said, bring them in anyway. About 5 or 6 months later, that same hiring manager walked in with another open rec saying we had to let the person go. And they pulled up the report, and they looked to see why the person was let go. And it was pretty much, if they had listened to the report, they wouldn't have hired the person in the first place. So that person now, that hiring manager, is now one of the biggest supporters of doing this, because you know what? he just lost 6 months. And I mentioned small companies and big companies because we're a small company. We're 60, 70 employees. If we make a mistake, it takes so much work to fix that mistake, and we lose so much time. If Walmart makes a mistake with hiring somebody, with 2.5 million people, you're probably not going to have the impact it has on a person with a 60 or 150 or 300 person company. So, the impact you can have on a bad hire or somebody that's going to be disruptive is huge, and we all know and we've seen that and we can understand it. Putting that step in the hiring process, if it was going to take 5 or 10 days, that's really hard to justify because you really don't get much information. If you can get really actionable information and do it in a couple of minutes, that can make a big impact on your business.
Sure. And earlier, Jack, you spent a good portion of the presentation, talking a little bit about risk and how that factors into the reference checking process. And this is a great question, speaking to just that. We use reference checking, but it's manual, and we gather the data while on the call with the person. It works well to gather the data, but we are only using information for leads. Is this legal? The reference part of the call is really really the reason that we're speaking with this person.
And they said they're using it as a lead, L-E-A-D?
Yeah, like a lead, yeah.
Yeah, so, technically I don't see, I'm not a lawyer, but, I've been doing this for 5 years, specifically on the recruiting side, and I don't think it's illegal. Maybe it might be a little unethical, but, even that's not too bad. Most of those people are on LinkedIn or somewhere socially active. So I just think that the only time it becomes passive versus an active passive is when somebody goes through a process. Like I said there was about 30% of those people who are passive candidates drop into that database. We originally, when we started capturing those names, it was 100% went to our customers, but they were finding that it wasn't a good target area. It was like calling it out of the phone book. So now when we ask those references if they'd like to be considered for future job opportunities, we actually ask them twice. We say, would you like to be considered? If they say yes, we say, just so you know, somebody may call you about a job at this organization. Are you still sure? And if they drop into that database, they are completely sure. And we get between 20 and 30% now. But our customers are telling us they're really good 20 to 30%. So, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing for you guys to be doing that. But it's again, you don't want to waste any of your time. If somebody, everybody says when we network, that's our job and all that stuff. But boy, if you could do something that you're trying to do, also get people interested and have that be a really a target-rich opportunity. I think that's the way to go. So. I applaud you for your creativity, that's for sure.
Sure, no doubt. Well, that's how recruiters think, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Any way to flip over a new stone. And one last one that we do have here, Jack, too, is goes back to what you were just talking about, big company, small company, which I think there's a lot of great points pertaining to just that topic. And the question is there a volume level that you recommend we cross over before we begin to consider using a third party?
It depends. We go down, we have, not to sell our stuff, but we go down and we have 10-pack solutions. So if you do more than 5 hires a year or 4 hires a year, and you think about doing it on the final 2 or 3 candidates, you can justify it by finding, one passive candidate and avoiding one bad hire or, saving yourself some time during the process. So I think anybody that has some challenging recruiting and needs to make the right decision at the right time with the right person can do it, and especially if you're going to use it on the final couple candidates. Because if you think about it, our standard is to ask for 5 references per candidate. So if you have 5 job openings this year and you do it on the final 2 candidates, so you start doing the math on that, you're going to get a great passive pool of people as well. So, I think at that point it's definitely justifiable at 5 to 10 hires per year.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well, Jack, we have a couple minutes left. Is there any final thoughts or anything you'd like to leave today's audience with?
No, I think the biggest thing, I'm really fortunate in my job. I get to go travel the country and talk to so many of my customers and recruiters and HR professionals, and I see HR is moving from a very transactional, opportunistic kind of department to, there's a lot of people. Again, why you're on this webinar is to get better, get smarter, and really more valuable, both personally and professionally. And I think that one thing I find across the board is that when you're thinking out of the box on how am I going to drive this organization to reach its goals, its business goals, maybe it's overriding goals that are in your annual report or on your website or being talked about. That's when you become more valuable, both as an employee and a function and a department. And that's what I say. If you're on this webinar for a reason, and I think that one of the things I find is that I love when a customer comes up to me and says, "You wouldn't believe this, what happened." Like the woman in Texas telling me about that hiring manager. That hiring manager was one of the most challenging people she had to deal with. Now he's her biggest supporter, and you all know those people. You have them. You deal with them every day. If we can put you in a position, and you can put yourself in a position where you can make a big impact, then you know what? Then your additional ongoing education, your credits, etc., are making an impact. So that's all I would do. I would try to look for moving from transactional kind of thought process to really trying to change the landscape, understand where the leadership is taking your organization, and support that in everything you do. And if it doesn't, don't do it.
Great words there, Jack. Thank you. Really some valuable insights that you shared with everyone today, and we really appreciate your time. On behalf of Recruiting Blogs, I'd like to thank all of our attendees as well for taking time out of your schedule to be part of today's presentation. Again, keep in mind that an email will be forthcoming with a link with a recording of today's presentation. And to learn more about SkillSurvey, of course, you can visit skillsurvey.com to learn about their products and services. We thank them a lot as well. And as always, to all our recruiting and HR friends, you could always share what's on your mind by visiting recruitingblogs.com. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon.